Every family dinner felt like a battlefield, but tonight was different. My parents had just announced they were giving my sister Emma the family lake house, our childhood sanctuary, while I got nothing. Again. As they raised their glasses in celebration, I pulled out the envelope I had been carrying for weeks. The one that contained DNA results and bank statements. The one that would destroy everything they thought they knew about their perfect golden child. Where are you watching from tonight? If this story of family betrayal and shocking revelations sounds familiar, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where justice finally wins. Because what happened next at that dinner table will make you question everything about family loyalty. The favoritism started when I was 7 years old. Emma could do no wrong while I was constantly criticized, overlooked, and dismissed. When she failed college, they paid for her second chance. When I graduated summa cum laude, they forgot to attend my ceremony. When she crashed her third car, they bought her a brand new one. When I needed help with my student loans, they suggested I work harder. For 28 years, I watched my parents shower Emma with love money and opportunities while treating me like an unwelcome guest in my own family. They justified it by saying Emma needed more support because she was struggling while I was the responsible one who could handle herself. The responsible one who did not deserve their attention or investment. The breaking point came 6 months ago when my father had his heart attack. While he was recovering, my mother asked me to handle his financial paperwork since I worked in accounting. She trusted me with the family finances, which was ironic, considering how little they trusted me with anything else that mattered. Going through his desk drawers, I found years of financial records that made my blood run cold. Bank transfers totaling over $300,000 to Emma over the past decade. Money for her failed boutique business, her luxury apartment, deposits her credit card debts, her spa retreats, her shopping sprees. Money that came from my college fund, the inheritance from my grandmother, who specifically left equal amounts for both grandchildren and the family emergency savings. But the bank statements were just the beginning. Hidden beneath tax documents, I discovered something that shattered my understanding of our entire family dynamic. A manila folder labeled Emma Legal Issues contained court documents, police reports, and legal settlement papers dating back 12 years. My sister had been in serious trouble multiple times: drunk driving accidents she caused, credit fraud, embezzlement from her previous employer, even a hit-and-run incident where she injured an elderly man. Each time my parents hired expensive lawyers, paid hush money to victims, and covered up her crimes. They spent our family fortune ensuring Emma faced no consequences for her actions while convincing everyone, including me, that she was just unlucky or misunderstood. The woman I grew up envying for her charmed life was actually a serial criminal who destroyed innocent lives without remorse. The most devastating discovery was a recorded phone conversation between my parents discussing how to protect the family reputation by keeping me completely in the dark about Emma's legal troubles. My mother's voice was clear as she said, "Sarah is too rigid and moral. She would never understand that sometimes family means protecting each other from consequences. Emma is fragile, but Sarah is strong enough to handle disappointment." They deliberately chose to sacrifice my happiness, my financial security, and my emotional well-being to enable Emma's destructive behavior. Every time they chose her over me, every time they dismissed my achievements while celebrating her failures, every time they made me feel inadequate and unloved, it was all calculated manipulation designed to maintain their sick family dynamic. The final piece of the puzzle came when I decided to get DNA testing done through one of those ancestry websites, hoping to learn more about my genetic health history, since my parents were always secretive about family medical information. When the results arrived, I stared at the screen in complete shock. Emma and I were not full sisters. We shared only 25% DNA, the amount consistent with half-siblings or cousins. Emma was not my father's biological child. My mother had been unfaithful, and they had built 30 years of lies around this secret. Everything suddenly made sense. The favoritism, the secrecy, the desperate need to keep Emma happy and quiet. I realized my parents lived in constant fear that Emma would discover the truth about her paternity and expose my mother's affair. Their excessive generosity was not love, it was blackmail insurance. They sacrificed my childhood, my self-esteem, and my inheritance to keep their family secrets buried. Armed with this explosive information, I spent weeks copying documents, recording phone conversations, and gathering evidence. I hired a private investigator to confirm the details about Emma's covered up crimes and to trace exactly how much money had been stolen from my rightful inheritance. The PI's report was damning. Emma had cost our family over $400,000 in legal fees settlements and covered up damages. Money that should have been split equally between us had been entirely diverted to protect their guilty secret. I was ready for war. The family dinner where everything exploded was supposed to be a celebration of Emma's latest business venture, a jewelry line that I now knew was funded entirely by money stolen from my grandmother's inheritance. My parents had invited me to witness their announcement about gifting Emma the family lake house, the property where I had spent every summer of my childhood and foolishly thought would be shared between us. Sitting at that familiar dining room table, I watched my father beam with pride as he described how Emma deserved the lake house because she had such creative vision for turning it into a retreat center. My mother nodded enthusiastically, explaining how they wanted to invest in Emma's dreams because she had finally found her passion. Emma played her role perfectly, dabbing tears from her eyes as she thanked them for believing in her when nobody else would. She talked about how hard her life had been, how grateful she was for parents who supported her unconditionally, and how she planned to honor the family legacy through her new business. It was a masterful performance that might have fooled me 6 months ago. But now I could see the manipulation, the calculated emotions, and the practiced victimhood that had controlled our family dynamics for decades. I sat quietly through their speeches, my hand resting on the envelope containing the DNA results and financial evidence that would destroy their carefully constructed lies. When my father asked me to say something supportive about Emma's wonderful opportunity, I stood up slowly and placed the envelope on the table between us. The room fell silent as I opened it and began laying out documents one by one. Before we celebrate Emma's latest gift, I think we should discuss some interesting discoveries I made while helping Dad with his paperwork. I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Let's start with these bank records showing $400,000 transferred from my inheritance to cover Emma's legal problems. My mother's face went white as I spread out the court documents detailing Emma's drunk driving convictions, the embezzlement charges that were quietly settled, and the hit-and-run incident that left an elderly man with permanent injuries. My father started to interrupt, but I continued methodically presenting evidence. Then we have these recorded phone conversations where you both discuss keeping me ignorant about Emma's crimes because I'm too moral to understand family loyalty. I said, playing a clip of my mother's voice explaining their strategy for protecting Emma while sacrificing me. Emma tried to grab the papers claiming I was lying and manufacturing evidence, but I had prepared for her reaction. I pulled out my phone and began reading from the private investigator's report detailing every covered-up incident with dates, victim names, and settlement amounts. The final blow came when I placed the DNA test results on the table and announced that Emma was not my father's biological daughter. The secret they had spent 30 years protecting while ruining my relationship with them was now exposed to the entire family. The explosion that followed was everything I had hoped for, and more. Emma screamed that I was trying to destroy the family out of jealousy, but her protests sounded hollow when faced with scientific evidence. My mother broke down crying, confessing to the affair, and begging for forgiveness. My father sat in stunned silence, staring at the DNA results that proved his golden child was actually the product of my mother's betrayal. But the most satisfying moment came when I announced my next steps. I had already contacted the victims of Emma's covered-up crimes, offering to help them pursue delayed justice, now that the statute of limitations had not expired for several incidents. I had reported the financial fraud to the authorities, providing evidence of how my inheritance had been illegally diverted. And I had retained a family law attorney to pursue civil recovery of all stolen funds, plus interest and emotional damages. The lake house celebration turned into a confession session as 30 years of lies crumbled under the weight of undeniable evidence. For the first time in my life, my parents could not dismiss my concerns, minimize my feelings, or gaslight me into accepting their version of reality. The aftermath of that dinner was swift and brutal. Within 24 hours, Emma had hired her own attorney and was threatening to countersue me for defamation and emotional distress. My parents tried to convince me that exposing family secrets would hurt everyone involved, including myself, and begged me to accept a private settlement to keep everything quiet. But I had spent too many years being silenced and sacrificed for their comfort. This time I was prepared for their manipulation tactics because I had been building a network of allies who supported my quest for justice. The first ally came from an unexpected place. While researching Emma's legal history, I had tracked down Margaret Wilson, the elderly man Emma had hit during her covered-up drunk driving incident 12 years ago. Margaret's husband had suffered permanent disabilities from the accident, losing his ability to walk without assistance and enduring chronic pain that destroyed his retirement years. When I contacted Margaret to apologize for my family's actions and offer to help her pursue delayed justice, she broke down crying on the phone. She told me how my parents had threatened legal retaliation if she ever spoke about the accident, claiming Emma was a troubled young woman who deserved a second chance rather than a criminal who needed accountability. Margaret became my first witness and my strongest emotional support. She connected me with two other victims of Emma's crimes who had been similarly silenced through intimidation and payoffs. Together, we formed a coalition dedicated to ensuring Emma finally faced consequences for the damage she had inflicted on innocent people. My second crucial ally was David Rodriguez, the private investigator I had hired to trace Emma's criminal history. David had 20 years of experience in financial fraud cases and was personally offended by how my parents had manipulated the legal system to protect their daughter. He offered to work pro bono to ensure we had ironclad evidence for both civil and criminal proceedings. David introduced me to Rebecca Morrison, a family law attorney who specialized in inheritance fraud and financial abuse cases. Rebecca explained how my parents' actions constituted elder abuse, financial manipulation, and breach of fiduciary duty. She was confident we could recover not only my stolen inheritance, but also punitive damages for the emotional trauma they had inflicted through decades of favoritism and gaslighting. The most surprising ally came from within my extended family. My father's sister, Aunt Patricia, had always seemed to support my parents' favoritism toward Emma, so I expected her to side with them during our legal battle. Instead, she called me 3 days after the explosive dinner to confess that she had suspected Emma's paternity for years, based on the child's appearance, and my parents' suspicious behavior. Patricia revealed that she had tried multiple times to convince my parents to treat me more fairly, but they had always dismissed her concerns by claiming Emma needed extra support due to her sensitive nature. Learning about the financial fraud and covered-up crimes confirmed her worst suspicions about how far my parents would go to protect their guilty secrets. Patricia offered to testify about the family dynamics she had witnessed over the years, including conversations where my parents explicitly discussed their strategy of keeping me grateful for scraps while giving Emma everything she wanted. Her insider knowledge of family finances and her credibility as my father's sister made her testimony devastating to their defense. As word spread through our social circle about the legal proceedings, more people came forward with stories about Emma's troubling behavior that my parents had either covered up or explained away. Former friends described her stealing money and jewelry during social gatherings. Employers shared details about her workplace misconduct that had been quietly settled, and even family friends admitted they had always felt something was wrong with how I was treated compared to Emma. The momentum was building rapidly, but I knew my parents would not surrender easily. They had spent 30 years perfecting their manipulation tactics and would use every emotional weapon in their arsenal to maintain control over the narrative. The first counterattack came through my extended family. My parents called every relative, claiming I was having a mental breakdown and trying to destroy the family with false accusations motivated by jealousy and spite. They portrayed Emma as a victim of my vindictive campaign and themselves as heartbroken parents whose generosity was being twisted into something sinister. Some family members believed their story initially, but David's documented evidence and Rebecca's legal expertise made it impossible to deny the facts. The DNA results, bank records, court documents, and recorded conversations created an irrefutable case that even my parents' most loyal supporters could not dismiss. The second counterattack was more personal and cruel. Emma began spreading rumors about my mental health, claiming I had always been unstable and that my accusations were the product of a psychological breakdown triggered by career stress and romantic failures. She convinced several family friends that I was experiencing a delusional episode and needed psychiatric intervention rather than legal support. This attack hit harder than I expected because it targeted my deepest insecurities about being the family scapegoat. For a moment, I questioned whether pursuing justice was worth the emotional cost and social isolation. But Margaret Wilson reminded me that abuse victims often face exactly this type of gaslighting when they finally speak truth to power. The turning point came when Rebecca filed formal legal documents in civil court, making our case part of the public record. My parents could no longer control the narrative or dismiss the evidence as family drama. The court documents outlined every financial fraud, every covered-up crime, and every instance of inheritance theft with legal precision that demanded answers. My father attempted one final manipulation by calling me personally to arrange a private meeting where we could resolve everything without further damaging the family reputation. He promised to make financial amends and suggested we could rebuild our relationship if I would only stop the public humiliation and legal proceedings. For a moment, his familiar voice and parental authority almost convinced me to consider his offer. The little girl inside me who had spent a lifetime craving his approval whispered that maybe this was my chance to finally earn the love and respect I had always wanted. But then I remembered Margaret Wilson's husband still struggling with disabilities from Emma's hit and run. I thought about all the victims who had been silenced and dismissed, while Emma continued hurting innocent people without consequences. I realized that accepting my father's private settlement would make me complicit in the same system of cover-ups and enablement that had destroyed so many lives. I declined his meeting and prepared for the next phase of our legal battle, knowing that my parents would escalate their efforts to stop me from exposing 30 years of family lies and financial crimes. 3 weeks into our legal battle, when everything seemed to be progressing smoothly, I received the phone call that nearly destroyed everything I had worked to build. It was Rebecca Morrison, my family law attorney, and her voice sounded strained and apologetic. "Sarah, we need to meet immediately. There has been a significant development that could compromise our entire case," she said, refusing to elaborate over the phone. The urgency in her tone sent ice through my veins. When I arrived at Rebecca's office that afternoon, I found her sitting across from a man I did not recognize. Rebecca's usually confident demeanor seemed shaken as she introduced him as Detective James Murphy from the Financial Crimes Unit. My stomach dropped as I realized this meeting was not about strategy, it was about damage control. "Ms. Johnson, I am afraid we have discovered some troubling information about one of your key witnesses." Detective Murphy began, his expression grave. "David Rodriguez, the private investigator you have been working with, has been conducting unauthorized surveillance and potentially illegal evidence gathering on your behalf." The room spun as he explained that David had been using his connections within the police department to access confidential records without proper warrants. Some of the evidence he had gathered about Emma's past crimes had been obtained through illegal means, which could invalidate our entire case and potentially result in criminal charges against both David and myself. But the worst revelation was yet to come. Detective Murphy opened a file folder and slid several photographs across the table. They showed David meeting with my father at a coffee shop downtown, shaking hands and exchanging what appeared to be an envelope. "We have reason to believe, Mr. Rodriguez has been working as a double agent gathering information for your case, while simultaneously reporting your legal strategy to your parents," Detective Murphy explained. "Bank records show he received a payment of $50,000 from your father's account 2 days after you hired him." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. David had been present for every strategy meeting, had access to all our evidence, and knew the identities of every witness we planned to call. If he had been feeding information to my parents, they would have had weeks to prepare counter-arguments, intimidate witnesses, and destroy additional evidence. Rebecca looked devastated as she explained the implications. Sarah, this means they have known about every move we plan to make. They have had time to coach Emma on her testimony, hide additional financial records, and potentially threaten or bribe the other witnesses. Our entire case strategy has been compromised from the beginning. The detective continued with more crushing news. Margaret Wilson, the elderly woman whose husband had been injured in Emma's hit-and-run accident, had suddenly withdrawn her willingness to testify. When investigators contacted her, she claimed she had been mistaken about the details of the accident and no longer felt comfortable participating in legal proceedings. Two other victims of Emma's crimes had also mysteriously changed their stories, now claiming they had been satisfied with the original settlements and held no grudges against my sister. The coalition of witnesses I had spent weeks building was crumbling before my eyes. Even worse, Aunt Patricia had called Rebecca's office that morning to announce she would no longer be providing testimony about the family dynamics she had witnessed. She claimed she had been speaking from emotion rather than facts, and did not want to cause further family discord with unreliable memories. As I sat in that conference room watching 30 years of accumulated evidence and carefully planned justice dissolve into nothing, I felt the familiar sensation of being utterly defeated by my family's superior resources and manipulation tactics. They had managed to turn my own hired investigator against me, intimidate my witnesses into silence, and isolate me once again. Detective Murphy explained that while David's illegal evidence gathering did not necessarily prove my accusations were false, it had contaminated our case to the point where prosecution would be nearly impossible. Any defense attorney would be able to argue that the evidence had been obtained through fraudulent means and should be dismissed. Rebecca tried to maintain optimism, suggesting we could rebuild the case using only legally obtained evidence, but we both knew the reality was much darker. Without witness testimony, and with my parents now aware of every piece of evidence I possessed, they would have time to create alibis, destroy records, and craft a narrative that painted me as an unstable daughter making false accusations. The meeting ended with Detective Murphy warning me that if I continued pursuing charges based on illegally obtained evidence, I could face criminal prosecution myself. Rebecca advised me to take time to consider whether continuing the legal battle was worth the personal and financial risks involved. Walking out of that office, I felt more alone and defeated than ever before. The family members who had initially supported me were now backing away, terrified of being associated with a case that involved illegal surveillance and potential criminal charges. The victims who had trusted me to help them find justice were now refusing to speak publicly about their experiences. Emma had somehow managed to turn my moment of triumph into another devastating defeat. Even when I had overwhelming evidence of her crimes and my parents' financial fraud, they had found a way to neutralize my efforts and make me appear to be the villain in our family drama. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by copies of bank records, DNA test results, and legal documents that now seemed worthless. The man I had trusted to help me gather evidence had been working for my parents from the beginning, feeding them information about my strategy while pretending to support my quest for justice. I realized that my parents' manipulation tactics were far more sophisticated than I had ever imagined. They had not simply reacted to my accusations, they had anticipated them and prepared countermeasures that turned my own weapons against me. David's betrayal was not a lucky accident. It was part of a calculated strategy to let me build a case and then systematically destroy it from within. For the first time since discovering the truth about my family, I wondered if I should accept defeat and try to rebuild my life without seeking justice for the decades of abuse and theft I had endured. Maybe some battles were not worth fighting, especially when the enemy was willing to use tactics that I could never bring myself to employ. But as I looked at the DNA test results, proving Emma was not my father's biological daughter, I remembered that truth has a power that transcends legal technicalities and family manipulation. Even if I could not prove my case in court, I knew the reality of what my parents had done, and that knowledge would eventually find a way to surface. Just when I thought all hope was lost, salvation came from the most unexpected source. 3 days after the devastating meeting with Detective Murphy, I received a call from someone I had never heard of. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a forensic accountant who specialized in family financial fraud cases. Ms. Johnson, you do not know me, but I have been following your case through professional channels, she said, her voice calm and confident. I believe I have information that could completely change the trajectory of your legal situation, but I need to meet with you in person to discuss sensitive details. Elena explained that she had been conducting a separate investigation into a network of attorneys and private investigators who specialized in covering up wealthy families' legal problems through illegal evidence suppression and witness intimidation. David Rodriguez had been on her radar for months as a suspected participant in this network. When we met at her downtown office the next morning, Elena presented me with a file that made my hands shake as I read through it. She had been conducting a legitimate federal investigation into David's activities with full law enforcement cooperation and proper warrants. Everything David thought he was hiding had actually been documented by federal investigators. Your former investigator made a crucial mistake, Elena explained with a slight smile. He assumed that because he was reporting your activities to your parents, he was protected from scrutiny. What he did not realize was that we had been monitoring his communications for months as part of a larger investigation into judicial corruption. Elena's evidence was devastating and completely legal. She had recordings of David's phone conversations with my father discussing strategies for discrediting my witnesses and destroying evidence. She had bank records showing not just the $50,000 payment I already knew about, but a series of payments totaling over $200,000 that my parents had made to David over the past 5 years. The most shocking revelation was that David had been helping my parents cover up Emma's crimes long before I ever hired him. He had been the one facilitating the illegal evidence destruction, bribing witnesses to change their stories, and creating false documentation to support Emma's alibis in her various criminal cases. Your parents did not just react to your investigation by corrupting your private investigator, Elena explained. They have been using him for years to maintain their cover-up operation. When you hired him, they saw it as an opportunity to control your investigation from the inside while gathering information about what evidence you had discovered. Elena had also uncovered something even more damaging than financial fraud: tax evasion on a massive scale. My parents had been claiming Emma's legal settlements and payments as business expenses for years, defrauding the federal government of hundreds of thousands of dollars in unpaid taxes. This elevated their crimes from family financial disputes to federal felonies that could result in serious prison time. But Elena's investigation had revealed an even more shocking truth about Emma's paternity. The DNA test I had conducted was accurate. Emma was not my father's biological daughter. However, Emma had known this truth for over 10 years and had been actively blackmailing my parents to maintain their financial support and legal protection. Your sister is not the helpless victim your parents portrayed, Elena said, sliding additional documents across her desk. She discovered her true parentage during a medical emergency when she needed family medical history. Instead of confronting your parents about their deception, she realized she could use this information as leverage to ensure they would continue funding her lifestyle and covering up her crimes. Elena had phone recordings where Emma explicitly threatened to expose my mother's affair and destroy the family reputation unless my parents continued their unlimited financial support. The favoritism I had endured was not just about protecting a family secret, it was the result of active extortion by someone I had always viewed as the spoiled but innocent golden child. The evidence Elena presented painted Emma as a master manipulator who had been orchestrating the family dysfunction for her own benefit, while maintaining a facade of vulnerability and gratitude. She had calculated exactly how much emotional and financial damage she could inflict on our family, while ensuring my parents remained desperate to keep her happy. Elena also brought news about my witnesses. Margaret Wilson and the other victims had not voluntarily withdrawn their testimonies. They had been threatened with financial ruin and additional legal harassment if they continued cooperating with my case. Elena's federal investigation had documented these intimidation tactics, which constituted additional felony charges against my parents and Emma. The good news is that federal witness protection protocols now apply to your case, Elena explained. Mrs. Wilson and the other victims will be able to provide their testimony without fear of retaliation, and we have evidence of the threats that were made against them. Elena's involvement transformed my case from a family legal dispute into a federal criminal investigation with the full resources of law enforcement behind it. She had spent months building an airtight case with properly obtained evidence, documented witness intimidation, and clear proof of financial crimes that extended far beyond my family's internal dynamics. The most satisfying revelation came when Elena showed me surveillance footage of David meeting with my father and Emma together, discussing strategies for discrediting my mental health and painting me as an unstable daughter fabricating accusations for attention. Their casual discussion of destroying my reputation and emotional well-being was captured in high-definition video with crystal-clear audio. "Your family made the mistake of treating federal crimes as if they were private family matters," Elena said. "They assumed their money and connections could protect them from any consequences, but financial fraud and witness intimidation are serious felonies that cannot be settled privately or covered up through family manipulation." Elena also revealed that she had been in contact with Rebecca Morrison, who was now working in full cooperation with the federal investigation. Rebecca had been deliberately excluded from the compromised information sharing with David, so our original legal strategy remained viable under federal protection. As we concluded our meeting, Elena handed me a folder containing indictment paperwork that would be filed within the next week. My parents, Emma and David, were all facing multiple federal charges that could result in substantial prison sentences and complete financial forfeiture. "Ms. Johnson, I want you to understand that this is no longer about family dynamics or inheritance disputes," Elena said. "Your family has been operating a criminal enterprise for over a decade, and they are about to face the full consequences of their actions through the federal justice system. For the first time in months, I felt genuine hope that justice would finally be served." Elena's investigation had not only validated every accusation I had made about my family's behavior, but had uncovered crimes far more serious than I had ever imagined. The people who had spent decades making me feel powerless and insignificant were about to discover that some consequences cannot be avoided through manipulation and money. The federal indictments were unsealed on a Tuesday morning that felt like Christmas, my birthday, and Vindication Day all rolled into one. I watched the local news coverage from my apartment as reporters described the charges against my parents and Emma: conspiracy to commit financial fraud, federal tax evasion, witness intimidation, and racketeering. The news anchor read each charge with the gravity they deserved, explaining how my family had operated a criminal conspiracy for over 12 years to cover up serious crimes while defrauding victims and government agencies. The story that had started as a family dinner argument had become a federal case study in how wealth and privilege could not ultimately protect people from justice. Emma was arrested at her luxury apartment while preparing for what she thought would be another routine day of spending my stolen inheritance money. The surveillance footage Elena had gathered showed Emma's shock as federal agents explained the charges against her, including blackmail conspiracy and her direct participation in witness intimidation. My father was taken into custody at his office, where he had been meeting with attorneys to discuss strategies for discrediting my mental health. The irony was perfect. The man who had spent decades questioning my stability and judgment was arrested while attempting to orchestrate another campaign of family manipulation and gaslighting. My mother's arrest was perhaps the most satisfying because it occurred at the country club where she had spent years maintaining her reputation as a devoted family matriarch. Her fellow club members witnessed federal agents reading her rights for financial conspiracy and fraud, permanently destroying the social standing she had valued above her relationship with her own daughter. David Rodriguez was arrested simultaneously as part of the broader investigation into his criminal network. Elena's federal case had uncovered his involvement in dozens of similar family cover up operations, making my family's crimes part of a much larger pattern of corruption that had affected hundreds of victims over the years. The financial restitution was swift and comprehensive. Federal asset forfeiture laws meant that everything my parents had purchased with stolen money was immediately seized, including the lake house they had planned to give Emma, their primary residence, luxury vehicles, and investment accounts. The money was placed in federal custody, pending distribution to victims and rightful inheritors. Elena worked with federal prosecutors to ensure that my inheritance would be fully restored with interest and punitive damages. The final amount exceeded $600,000 more than I had ever realized had been stolen from me over the years. But more important than the money was the official acknowledgement that I had been the victim of systematic financial abuse and family manipulation. Margaret Wilson finally got the justice she had been denied for 12 years. Emma was ordered to pay additional damages for the hit-and-run accident, and Margaret's husband received compensation for his ongoing medical expenses and pain and suffering. Margaret called me after the sentencing to say that seeing Emma in handcuffs had given her closure she never thought possible. The other victims of Emma's crimes also received justice and compensation through the federal restitution program. People who had been silenced and intimidated for years were finally able to tell their stories publicly and receive acknowledgement of the harm that had been done to them. The sentencing hearing was everything I had dreamed it would be during those long nights when I felt hopeless and defeated. Emma received 8 years in federal prison for her leadership role in the criminal conspiracy. My parents each received 6 years for financial fraud and witness intimidation. David Rodriguez was sentenced to 12 years as a repeat offender who had victimized multiple families. But the most meaningful moment came when the federal judge addressed my family directly before imposing their sentences. She spoke about the particular cruelty of using family relationships to perpetrate financial crimes and emotional abuse. She noted that my parents had not only stolen money, but had systematically destroyed their daughter's self-worth and sense of family belonging for their own criminal purposes. The defendants in this case exploited the most fundamental human need for family love and acceptance to commit serious crimes, the judge said. They weaponized parental authority and sibling relationships to maintain a criminal conspiracy that caused lasting harm to both immediate family members and innocent victims in the community. Today, 2 years after that explosive family dinner, I have built a life that reflects my true worth, rather than my family's twisted valuation of my existence. The inheritance money allowed me to start my own accounting firm, specializing in helping other victims of family financial abuse identify and recover stolen assets. Elena Vasquez became not just a professional colleague, but a close friend who understood the unique trauma of discovering that your family had been systematically destroying your life for their own benefit. We work together frequently, using our combined expertise to help other people escape similar situations of family financial manipulation. I have also found my chosen family among the other victims and survivors I met through this process. Margaret Wilson and I maintain a close friendship, supporting each other through the ongoing healing process that follows family betrayal. The bonds formed through shared trauma and mutual support have proven stronger and more authentic than the blood relationships that were based on lies and exploitation. Most importantly, I have learned to trust my own perceptions and judgment after decades of being gaslit into believing I was too sensitive, too demanding, or too ungrateful. The federal investigation validated every instinct I had about my family's behavior and confirmed that my feelings of unfairness and manipulation had been completely accurate. My parents occasionally send letters from prison attempting to reconcile and rebuild our relationship, but I have learned that some damage cannot be repaired through apologies. People who spend 30 years systematically destroying their child's emotional well-being for their own criminal purposes do not suddenly become trustworthy parents because they face consequences. Emma has never acknowledged responsibility for her actions or expressed genuine remorse for the harm she caused to me or her other victims. Her letters focus on her own suffering and hardships in prison, maintaining the same victim mentality that allowed her to justify years of criminal behavior. I realize that expecting accountability from someone who spent decades perfecting the art of avoiding consequences was an exercise in futility. The most unexpected blessing has been the peace that comes from finally understanding my family dynamics clearly. For 30 years, I questioned my own worth and wondered what was wrong with me that made my parents treat me so differently from Emma. Learning that their favoritism was based on blackmail, criminal conspiracy, and guilty secrets allowed me to stop taking their rejection personally. I now understand that their inability to love me appropriately was never a reflection of my value as a person, but rather evidence of their own moral bankruptcy and criminal mindset. Children cannot earn unconditional love through perfect behavior, and parents who are capable of systematic financial fraud and emotional abuse are not capable of providing healthy family relationships. As I finish sharing this story with you, I want to ask, have you ever experienced family favoritism that seemed impossible to understand or justify? Have you discovered family secrets that completely changed your understanding of childhood dynamics? Share your experiences in the comments below, because recognizing these patterns can help other people identify and escape similar situations. If this story of family betrayal and ultimate justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family manipulation and finding healing after betrayal. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better treatment from their family members, regardless of blood relationships. Thank you for listening to my story and supporting my journey from family scapegoat to empowered survivor. Remember that sometimes the greatest act of family loyalty is refusing to enable criminal behavior and holding people accountable for their actions. Justice may be delayed, but it always finds a way to surface when we have the courage to speak truth about family dysfunction.